Hey everyone, welcome to Mountain Beast Mysteries. This is probably going to be one of the weirder videos on the channel. I would say it's probably the weirdest. We're going to be talking about alien abductions and all the things that go along with that. We've been digging into the UFO subject, and when people first, start researching the topic of UFOs and aliens and beings from other worlds, one of the first things, they get into is the abduction phenomena, because it's so scary and it's been happening for a long time. How long exactly? I don't know. A lot of the reported accounts started happening like in the 40s and 50s and 60s, but I'm sure because there's so much out there on like this ancient alien stuff, all these other theories that beings from other worlds have been here since ancient times, there's probably incidents that occurred, hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago. Surely something has happened. It's just the same as with like Bigfoot. We get all these Bigfoot reports from the 50s and 60s, but we know that people have been seeing them for hundreds of years, thousands of years. The indigenous people in North America have been seeing Sasquatch for thousands of years. Well, it's probably the same with the ET and UFO phenomena. It's probably been witnessed since the dawn of man, however long ago that was. But the abduction phenomena is something that people try to explain as being something natural, like a natural occurrence, like sleep paralysis or something like that, or maybe some sort of mental health issue. But a lot of the people, most of the people that come forward with these experiences don't have any mental illness. They talk to psychiatrists and they can't, identify what's going on, but that's because they're probably actually being abducted by aliens. So it can happen to people from all walks of life. There's no set criteria of who gets abducted. It happens to people from a wide variety of life, of all different ages, different sexes and whatnot. There's been reports of people getting taken to be as young as 2 years old. People usually won't remember, and if they do remember that they were taken, it's not until later on in adult life, and then they end up doing this regression therapy, and then they end up finding out what actually happened to them, and they find out that it's been going on since they were a little kid. Maybe people will find out that it's been happening through generations in their family. There's been a lot of reports of it going through generations. So if you're an individual who's been having these experiences, who's been being taken in the night by these alien beings, if you have a kid, there's a very good chance that your kid might be having the same experiences, which is scary. A kid shouldn't be going through that. I mean, an adult shouldn't be going through that either, right? Being taken against your will in the middle of the night by beings that, may not have the most benevolent intentions. So for a lot of people, the experiences are very traumatic. They're scary. They'll be sleeping. This is like a basic rundown of an experience. You'll be sleeping in bed. You'll be paralyzed, which, people could be like, oh, that's sleep paralysis. Beings could enter the room from the doorway or from the walls. They can move through walls sometimes. You'll be surrounded by them, and they'll lift you up out of bed, they'll levitate you out of bed, and sometimes they'll float you directly through a physical wall, which it's hard to wrap your head around how they could do that, but apparently, that happens. It's been documented many times. Some people are driving, they're not even sleeping. Some people are fully conscious, and then all of a sudden, they're not. All of a sudden, they're in kind of a different place. Maybe their car's a bit further down the road, or quite a bit further down the road sometimes. And they'll be like, where am I? Why am I parked here so far away from where I should be? People can be conscious, they could be driving, they could be out for a walk in the woods. Maybe they'll see a light or something approach them, and that's it. And there's usually a missing time. So let's say you're driving along, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, you forget where you are, and your surroundings are different, and it's 2 hours later or 3 hours. It could be a long time. In some cases it'll be days, like the case of Travis Walton. He was missing for days. Usually they're not that long. Okay, usually people are back in their beds or back in their car within a matter of hours. Sometimes people will be returned back to their bed, but they'll be on top of the blankets, or they'll be, their head will be where their feet should be. Or maybe they'll be in a different room of their house. And they'll be like, why am I here? This isn't right. Everyone's experience is unique, right? And sometimes the beings that people encounter are different as well. People will encounter your typical gray alien, short, maybe 3 or 4 foot tall gray alien with a lot of times they'll be wearing like a very basic, like one-piece unitard kind of thing. Sometimes they'll be like tall, like us, tall alien beings. Sometimes they'll look human-like. Sometimes they'll look insectoid in nature. Sometimes they'll be like reptilian. Usually people see these gray alien beings though, and it's really weird how they are, because a lot of times they're reported to be like, they don't seem like a biological entity. They almost seem robot-like. But when you dig into it, you'll find that these beings, their bodies and everything are organic, but they're not bred like naturally. They're created probably in a lab. There's reports of these gray aliens not having belly buttons, meaning they weren't born from like a mother, and they won't have genitalia either. So it's just like a body with some sort of consciousness inside of it that was not created naturally like people are created. Sometimes these experiences are good and sometimes they're bad. Like, people have the weirdest things done to them. They have, like, it's usually genetic type experiments that people will have conducted on them by these beings. They'll take samples, like sperm samples. They'll take eggs from women. Sometimes they won't be like genetic experiments like that, but they'll take like skin samples and various samples from all over the body, basically. But the weird thing is that most of them do seem to be like involving breeding and genetics and stuff like that. So people will report, maybe they were forced to breed with some sort of alien creature on a craft, or maybe these alien beings extracted an egg from a woman who was taken. There's even cases of people being pregnant, and then all of a sudden after their abduction experience, they're not pregnant. The fetus is gone. There's stories like that, which is crazy. Even like it gets weird. Like, sometimes the people who are taken aboard craft, they'll be told like that they have alien hybrid children that are like half human, half alien. And there's also stories of these people who are abducted being forced to like interact with these hybrid children on the craft and like kind of act as a parent to them, while the alien beings are like observing them, like observing how they interact with the hybrid babies, which is weird, which is very weird. And like, some abduction experiences aren't like that. They're not that strange. They're not that creepy. Like the Carlos Diaz story that I covered a few videos back, where he's filming these orange ships of light. His experience being taken aboard these craft weren't like that at all, really. He was told about like nature and the earth and how it has to be protected, and like it was more of a friendly, loving energy and not like a intrusive kidnapping kind of thing. Like, he in this instance felt like joy and love for these beings that took him, and like a sense of kinship, right? But in some of these cases, it's like, get me out of here, wake me up from this nightmare, because that is what it's like. But some cases it'll be like very hostile, traumatic. Some it'll be like, well, there'll almost be like a friendship being built between the abductee and the abductors. But aside from taking like samples from people, a lot of times people will report having implants put inside of them, various little metal implants that they don't really look like anything. Like, you can find footage and documentaries about these alien implants online just to get an idea of what they're like. But they'll put these implants in people to either, keep track of where they are so that they can take them again, or to monitor like their body and how they're doing. Something like that. It's either one of the two or both of them. It's probably both. They can probably like monitor you from a distance just to keep track of you, and then it acts as like a GPS. They can just track you down and find you if they ever wanted to take you again, which is very scary. And like a lot of people who do get taken, they get taken, and like it's not impossible to be taken many more times, right? Like you can be taken and then a year later you might be taken again, maybe a week later. Like it doesn't really, there's no set time between abductions, right? Somebody can get abducted, it could be 2 years later. You could just be expecting something to happen for a full 2 years before it actually does happen. You'd be living on the edge of your seat, wondering every time you went to bed, am I gonna get taken tonight? It's not up to you, it's up to them, which is scary. There's nothing that one can do to stop these things from happening. And like, they suspect that like millions of people in North America have been abducted or claim to have been abducted, which is quite a few. And if the abduction is done correctly, you won't even know. So there's probably so many people out there who have no idea about being abducted. I wonder if like everybody gets abducted and the only people who remember it are the ones where like it didn't go according to plan, right? They don't want us to remember for various reasons, mostly because I think it's so traumatic. A lot of times in these abduction cases, I would say most times, the communication between the abductee and the alien beings is done telepathically. So it's all through thought. And it's as if you do have a voice inside of your head and you're able to understand it, through whatever language you speak. I'm sure beings that come here from other worlds that have the abilities to do the things that they do with the craft that they have and whatnot, I'm sure learning the language of us beings is quite simple to them. So communicating telepathically like that and understanding all the words is not something that would be really difficult to do. It's not the same as like when people describe Sasquatch mind speak, when people are out in the wilderness and they'll hear these Sasquatch beings communicating with them telepathically. How does the Sasquatch know, English language? I don't know. Sasquatch could be an alien, or people could be making up those stories. But in these cases, it's not crazy to assume that the alien beings who are doing these experiments have also figured out our language and all the languages across the world. One really interesting thing that happens though is a lot of times before people have an abduction experience, they'll report encountering an animal of some kind. A lot of times people will report seeing deer at like close proximity in a very unusual encounter, like a random encounter, or they'll see an owl. An owl's another really popular creature that people will witness before being abducted, and they say that these beings can, show themselves to us as anything really. It could be an animal, it could be a ball of light. In a lot of experiences, it's been said that these beings have the ability to change the way that we perceive them. Not necessarily changing the way they appear to us, which is possible, but changing the way that we perceive them. One person might see something and they might be seeing an owl. Another person could be looking at the same thing and see a ball of light. It's really weird. And I'm sure with some of these beings that come from other places, maybe they can, inhabit any kind of body. Maybe they can show up here as literally anything. Maybe usually they're a ball of light or a ball of energy. Maybe some of these really advanced beings have the ability to somehow represent themselves here to us as anything, as a human being. We wouldn't even know. But it's possible. It's possible. It sounds crazy. This all sounds like stuff from science fiction, but it's all documented and reported in thousands of cases across the world of abductions. So Some people might even remember their abduction experience, but they'll perceive it as a dream. They'll remember it as a really vivid dream that they've had. And they might always think that that's what it was. Oh, I had this really, really vivid dream and these really interesting characters were in it and they were doing these really weird things to me. It must have been a nightmare. But there's a very good chance that it was not a nightmare and that it actually happened. So if you're having really vivid dreams about being taken by strange beings and having weird things done to you, there's a good chance that, it's actually happening. You should probably look into regression therapy to find out what is actually going on, what your subconscious remembers, Some people who have been taken, they will have like a really intense fear of hospitals or intense fears of like needles or surgery or any medical procedures like that. I mean, it's a very common thing to be scared of anyways, to have a fear of going to the hospital and to be like cut open. But because of the traumatic nature of these abduction experiences and that they actually do these things, they take samples, like they're in your subconscious, you might remember these experiences. And that could be why you have a fear of, surgery or going to the dentist or whatever. There's a very good chance because, when you're taken into these ships, a lot of times it's like a medical room of some kind where you're laying on a table, you can't move. And these beings are free to do anything they want to you. So there'll be abductions that happen where these beings will be taking samples, they'll be doing medical experiments, they'll be doing all these weird genetic things, taking samples of like eggs and sperm and all kinds of stuff like that. But there also supposedly is like an interest that they have in human woundedness and human pain. A lot of times the people who are taken are people who have lived very traumatic lives, have suffered incredible loss. Maybe they've experienced lots of death in their family and death of like friends and whoever else. Or who knows what the experience might be. Maybe it's a veteran who has like PTSD and has been through like combat and whatnot. But a lot of people who've been taken are people who have pain inside of them and lots of trauma. And so these beings abduct these people to, figure out what's going on. And it's not just an interest in the woundedness, but there's also an interest apparently in like healing that woundedness. A lot of people will have these experiences, these abduction experiences, people who've had awful, like terrible lives, like to no fault of their own, like they've had really bad stuff just happen to them. And after having these abduction experiences and realizing what's going on, these beings, they help them. And a lot of people experience healing in a weird way from it. I don't know if it's like the aliens like directly healing them, helping them, or they're finding, I don't know what they could be finding in the abduction experience, but there is an element of woundedness and healing in some of these cases, not just, oh, they're taking me, they're taking samples from me, this is a nightmare. There seems to be a balance. And so it's like, are some of these beings malevolent, really bad, they're after us, why could they be doing these experiments? But then there's also beings that might be here who want to help us, who are interested in us as maybe they see us as like a brother or sister in the universe, and they're interested in helping us and figuring out why we're so crazy, why we're always fighting wars and trying to destroy the planet. Maybe they're interested in stopping that. But I don't know. I feel like in the vastness of the universe, there has to be good and evil from, like in all walks of life across the galaxy, just like here on Earth. There's good people. There's good people on this planet doing great things, but there's also terrible people on this planet. It's interesting to think, like, human beings, we do genetic experiments. Like, there's labs like trying to do genetic experiments on people, even like the Neuralink thing that's happening right now. But everything having to do with like cloning animals, even like out in the wilderness, like forestry officers, they'll tranquilize they'll tranquilize bears and whatever, various kinds of wildlife, and they'll put trackers in them. They'll put chips in them. You know, so we're like abducting all these other creatures of this planet for various reasons, good reasons, sometimes bad reasons. You know, it's not crazy to think that some of these highly advanced civilizations from other, you know, planets or other realities, it's not so crazy to think that they would do the same thing here. But yeah, usually there's an absence, a really weird absence of mental illness in people who are being taken. They'll go through all the tests. Like a psychiatrist will determine them to be normal, whatever that is. You know, not suffering from any actual illness. So it's like, what is going on? The only thing that makes sense is that it's actually happening. And then you have like people like that Richard Doty guy, who's all about spreading disinformation about the UFO topic before, now coming forward and saying he was doing that. And also saying that like we had these black ops programs where the government would come in and stage alien abductions, utilizing people who have actual physical, like they're disfigured, using disfigured people to stage fake alien abductions. He says that in the documentary Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. I don't trust anything though that comes out of that guy's mouth. Like, how can you trust somebody who their key role was disinformation in a black ops program? Like, I feel like nowadays them coming out saying that, yeah, we like staged alien abductions, I feel like that's them probably wanting us to believe that these highly advanced alien beings aren't doing it. You know, they probably want us to believe that the government is at the top. You know, but I don't think there's much the government can do like about these beings. So that, like, I'm trying to wrap my head around them having the technology, like the government having the technology to get into someone's house, to make them levitate out of their bed, through a wall, into a ship, and then, you know, having all that missing time. Like, it's hard to believe that they would have the technology to do that. And if they did have the technology to do that, they would be getting it probably from aliens. You know? I don't know if I buy this theory that the government stages these abductions. That's all I'm trying to say, I guess. Yeah, there's a lot of good content out there on alien abductions. The psychiatrist John E. Mack was a very prominent figure in researching the abduction phenomena. He looked into that aerial school in Zimbabwe where all those school children were outside playing at recess or whatever, and they encountered those alien beings and saucers out in the schoolyard. He was the person who went there to interview them. He looked into the Carlos Diaz case. He wrote a lot of books on the abduction phenomena. I'd highly recommend checking them out. There's one, I think it's just called Abduction, and it's a very good breakdown of the phenomena, and he has specific chapters on different experiences that people have had, and one of them is the Carlos Diaz story. And it just gives you a good sense going through some of those books. Like, it gives you a good sense of the vast range of experiences people have had. You know, they're not just the typical, you get floated up out of your bed where you can't move and these beings are around you. There's many different experiences people have, and there's such a vast range of meaning people take from the experiences. Sometimes they're just pure nightmares, where they do all these medical experiments on you. They shove giant metal things up your butt. Like, sometimes they're like that. Like the Whitley Strieber story. He wrote the book Communion. Look up the book Communion. I highly recommend checking it out, but it's probably the most famous, one of the most famous abduction stories ever, along with like Betty and Barney Hill, who were taken from their car back in the 60s and had experiments done to them, had samples taken from them. You know, the Travis Walton case is also very famous, but this Communion book, I highly recommend checking it out. And there's also a movie they made of it called Communion, and they got Christopher Walken to play Whitley. It's kind of like a low budget movie, but it's actually not that bad. It's not that bad. It's kind of scary. You can find it on YouTube. I think you can rent it. There might be a free version of it as well. But, you know, if you ever have a really, really vivid dream, it might not be a dream. Keep an eye on the clock too. If you suspect things might be happening at night, keep an eye on the clock and watch for missing time. I just wanted this video to kind of be an introduction into these alien abduction stories, and I'm going to look deeper into some individual cases and we'll explore those. But that's going to be it for tonight's video. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on Mountain Beast Mysteries.